The forest stretched for miles. Ancient trees rose high into the sky like silent towers, their branches weaving together to form a thick green roof that barely allowed sunlight to pass through. The deeper you went, the quieter it became. No roads, no houses, no voices. Only the whisper of wind and the distant calls of birds. And somewhere inside that endless forest, a girl was walking alone. Her name was Lina. Her steps were slow and uneven. Dirt covered her feet and legs, and the thin brown dress she wore was torn in several places from scraping against branches. Her long, dark hair was tangled, falling over a face that would have been beautiful if it hadn't been covered in dust and exhaustion. She hadn't eaten properly in days. Her stomach ached. Every step felt heavier than the last. But she kept moving, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant pain. The forest floor crackled under her bare feet as she walked deeper between the towering trees. At one point, she paused and leaned against a thick trunk. Her breathing was shallow. "I can't keep walking forever," she whispered to herself. The words sounded small in the enormous forest. For a long moment, she stood there, staring at the endless trees ahead of her. She didn't know where she was going. The truth was, she had been running away from a place that had stopped feeling like home a long time ago. Lina closed her eyes briefly. Memories flickered through her mind. A small house, raised voices, anger, fear. And the moment she finally ran into the night, believing anywhere had to be better than staying. But now the forest surrounded her like a maze with no exit. Her legs finally gave up. Slowly, she slid down the side of the tree until she was sitting on the ground. Her stomach growled loudly. "Maybe someone will find me," she murmured weakly. But deep inside, doubt whispered something else. What if no one ever comes? Tears began rolling silently down her cheeks. She wrapped her arms around herself and lowered her head. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time moved strangely in the forest, but something nearby had noticed her. Hidden behind a cluster of thick bushes were 3 quiet creatures watching carefully. 3 curious capybara. The largest one slowly stepped forward. It moved calmly, its soft brown fur blending with the earth. Behind it were 2 smaller ones, staying close but clearly curious about the strange human sitting beneath the tree. Lina didn't notice them at first, but then she heard the soft rustle of leaves. Her head lifted slowly, and she froze. Standing only a few feet away was the largest rodent she had ever seen. The animal stared back at her with calm, dark eyes. Lina blinked. For a moment, she wasn't sure if she was imagining it, but then 2 more appeared behind the first. Instead of fear, something unexpected filled her chest. Relief. "Well," she whispered softly, wiping her eyes, "I guess I'm not alone after all." The capybaras didn't move away. They simply sat nearby, watching her quietly. The forest remained silent around them, but somehow the loneliness felt a little smaller. As the sun slowly began to sink behind the trees, the forest grew colder. Shadows stretched across the ground. Lina knew she needed shelter before night arrived. She forced herself to stand. Her legs trembled, but she managed to start collecting branches. Small sticks, large sticks, anything she could find. She tied pieces together using strips of cloth torn from the bottom of her dress. After nearly an hour of struggling, she managed to build something that barely resembled a tent. 2 branches leaned together, a piece of cloth stretched over them. Leaves piled around the edges to block the wind. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. When she finally crawled inside, she pulled the torn cloth tightly around her shoulders. The temperature dropped quickly once the sun disappeared. Lina shivered. For a moment, she wondered if she would even survive the night. But when she looked outside the small opening of the tent, she saw something that made her smile faintly. The capybaras were still there, curled up together near the entrance. almost like guards. "You stayed," she whispered. The largest capybara blinked slowly. Lina rested her head against her arm. For the first time since entering the forest, she didn't feel completely abandoned. And eventually, exhaustion pulled her into sleep. Morning arrived quietly. A soft beam of sunlight slipped through the trees and touched Lina's face. She opened her eyes slowly. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the smell of damp leaves and cold earth reminded her. Her stomach growled immediately. The hunger was worse now. She crawled out of the tent and stretched weakly. The capybaras were already awake. They were sniffing around the forest floor. Then one of them began scratching at the dirt. Another joined. They dug quickly, tossing soil behind them. Lina watched curiously. "What are you looking for?" A few moments later, something appeared beneath the soil. A thick root. The capybara tugged it loose and dropped it onto the ground. Lina's eyes widened. Food. She rushed over and began helping them dig. Soon they uncovered several more roots hidden beneath the forest floor. Her heart raced with excitement. Maybe she could survive here after all. She gathered stones and carefully built a small circle. Using dry leaves and twigs, she managed to start a tiny fire. The flames flickered gently. Soon, a small metal cup she carried was filled with water and placed above the fire. She dropped the roots inside. The water began to boil slowly. Steam rose into the cool forest air. When the roots were finally soft enough to eat, Lina carefully took a bite. The taste was earthy and plain, but to her it felt like the best meal she had ever had. She laughed softly. "You helped me," she told the capybaras. They sat nearby, calm as ever, watching her quietly. Days passed. Lina built a routine. Every morning she searched for roots. The capybaras helped dig. Every evening she boiled them over the small fire, and every night they slept beside her fragile tent. Sometimes rain poured through the forest canopy. Sometimes the wind howled loudly between the trees. But the capybaras never left. They stayed beside her, silent companions in a lonely world. Yet despite their help, Lina grew weaker. Roots were not enough. Her body needed more food. Her steps became slower each day, and somewhere beyond the forest, a search had begun. A park ranger had discovered small footprints near the forest trail. Human footprints, too small to belong to an adult. The discovery worried him immediately. He contacted the police. Within hours, a search team formed. Officers began combing through the forest, calling out into the silence. "Hello! Is anyone out there?" But the forest was enormous. Finding one girl felt nearly impossible. Back at the small tent, Lina sat beside the dying fire. Her vision blurred slightly. She hadn't eaten enough that day. "I hope someone finds me," she whispered quietly. One of the capybaras rested beside her, its warm body close against her arm. The comfort helped. Then suddenly, a distant voice echoed through the trees. "Hello?" Lina froze. Her heart pounded. Was it real, or was her mind playing tricks? Again, the voice called. "Is anyone there?" Lina jumped to her feet. "Help!" she shouted with all the strength she had left. The capybaras followed as she stumbled toward the sound. Branches snapped as people pushed through the forest. And then, 2 police officers appeared through the trees. For a moment, everyone stood still. The officers stared in disbelief. A thin, dirty girl standing in the forest, surrounded by capybaras. One officer slowly approached. "It's okay," he said gently. "You're safe now." Lina's legs gave out. She collapsed forward, and the officer caught her before she hit the ground. For the first time since entering the forest, she began to cry. At the hospital, Lina received warm food, clean clothes, and medical care. Doctors said she had been dangerously close to starvation, but she would recover. And when she finally stepped outside into the hospital garden days later, Three familiar shapes waited near the fence, the capybaras. Lina ran toward them. Tears filled her eyes as she hugged the largest one. "You didn't leave me," she whispered. A nearby officer smiled softly. "Looks like they adopted you first." Lina laughed for the first time in many days, because sometimes kindness doesn't come from people. Sometimes it comes quietly, from the gentle heart of nature, and Lina would never forget the friends who helped her survive.